Okay, so magandang araw po sa bawat isa. So this is the recorded discussion of the summary of the 5 lessons in assessment and learning too. Okay, so as much as possible, please listen carefully to this discussion, not for the purpose or in corresponds po sa ating midterm, but this is a very important factor that you should learn, most especially to us or to you guys, future educator. Okay po? So listen carefully this moment because those factors that we're going to talk about was a very important thing that you need in your future. Okay po? And might help you guys to in your coming practice teaching, di ba? And those kinds of practices that we're going to do corresponds to your career, future career po. Okay po? So let us start. So mahaba-haba po ito ha. Kasi again, ulitin ko, this is the summary of um the 5 lessons in assessment and learning 2 bago po tayo mag midterm. Okay po. So first, let us discuss this terminology. Okay po. We have assessment and learning in practical meaning po or practical definition. Okay. So when we say assessment, that is the way to test or to see the outcome of something. Okay. So in order to know the result of a specific idea, in enable for us to know the result or outcome of a process, we should do assessment. Hindi lang po ito sa learning, hindi lang po ito sa teaching. Okay po. So lahat ng areas, sa lahat ng field, sa lahat po ng uri ng industry, we do assessment. In companies, we do assessment to see the growth of that specific company. Okay, so assessment is very important. And when we say learning, that is the process of gaining knowledge, the process of having the idea or knowledge, okay po, which corresponds to the specific teaching po. So learning is our response to teaching. So learning is very important. The purpose why you go to school is that for us guys to really learn and use it in our future field. Okay, so let's continue. So I have here some important quotation that you might be encouraged to understand or to give comprehension or to give your idea of how you well understand the following factors. So we have number 1. So sabi dito, good teaching is more giving or is more a giving of right questions than a giving of right answers. That is according to Joseph Albers. Sabi po niya dyan, ma-identify daw po na effective si teacher o yung teaching na ginagawa niya is maayos, effective, or naayon po sa ikabubuti ng mga students by giving the right questions. Okay po. Not just giving the right answers. So that is assessment. Number 2, maintindihan po natin yan mamaya. Number 2, learners needs endless feedbacks more than they need endless teaching. I believe to this, no, na when a student or a learner do something or do feedback on learning process, feedback is very important. So ano po yung feedback na tinatawag natin? Maganda po na ino-organize po natin yung bata kung ano po yung naging weakness or naging strength niya sa ginawang activity. Maganda din po na through feedback we could identify na yung bata ay may problema sa ganitong area. So, ang purpose po ni feedback is para po makita niya kung saan siya effective, saan siya nagkamali. So, feedback is very important. Then, needs of endless teaching. Because I repeat, guys, teaching could not be recognized. Teaching would not be said effective if there is no assessment. Kasi po, mga bata, ano yan madalas yan. Okay, class, may tanong ba kayo? Ma'am, wala po. 'Di ba? For the purpose lang or for the reason na matapos na yung discussion, sasabihin na lang nila wala po. Pero, you know what? at the back of the mind of that every student, they have something that you want to ask na hindi na lang nila tinatanong para hindi na mapahaba pa. And that is true. And another thing, um, one factor that we could recognize or we could say about students, excuse me, is that um, gustong-gusto nila yung teaching pero ayaw nila ng activity, ayaw nila ng assessment because that will be very hard for them, sabi nila. Pero ma-identify lang tayo na effective kapag po tayo ay nakagawa ng evaluation sa pinagawa po natin sa bata. Okay? Number 3, assessment for learning requires that what you do next depends on what you know about them, which is the student. So, we should know, or the effective way to identify the learning of the student is by continuing or by doing our response doon po sa natapos na lesson or sa natapos na assessment na ginawa mo or naka-vary po doon sa feedback na ginawa mo sa bata noong nakaraan or kahapon, let's say. So, ano po ibig sabihin nun? Okay po? Hindi ka po dapat umaalis sa lesson kung alam mo na si bata or si learner hindi niya naiintindihan yung nakaraang lesson. Okay? So, that is the importance of assessment. In the way of assessment, we could identify na si learner po ay natuto or hindi. At yan po yung, we know that learning process is gradual, but at the same time, this is continuous. So, when we say continuous, hindi po siya napuputol at hindi ka po magja-jump sa another stage na hindi pa po kumpleto o hindi pa po malinaw si nakaraang level or stage po. So, that is the importance of assessment. We should depend the teaching or the assessment that we should do next in corresponds po doon sa outcome sa bata noong nakaraang activity or nakaraang status po ng learning niya. And that is very important. Number 4, sabi po ni, we know him, we have Albert Einstein. Everyone is a genius, but if you judge a fish on its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing that it is stupid. Okay po. So, that is assessment also. We could not, or first, we know that our students, di ba, kayo din, in your room, in your classmate, we could identify that we have different, excuse me, we have different type of learners, di ba? Meron po tayong active learners. We also have those types of learners that is in favor of doing physical activities. Okay po? So, that are the types of learners that we have. So, hindi po natin sila ma-identify or hindi po natin matuturuan ng bata na or mapipilit na gawin ang isang activity nang hindi po talaga nila kaya. Okay po? Kumbaga, kaya po tayo nag-vary or meron po tayong types of learners for us to really identify or to really recognize what are the things or the ways that we could use or that we could strategy that we could use po able for them to learn. Okay? So, isa po yan sa trabaho ni teacher to do adjustment or to do thinking or variation of the types of strategies that they could do for the learners to be learned. Again, so what are the types of learners that we have? We have visual learners. So when we say visual learners, these are the types of students that they might learn more when they are being shown with pictures like that, and they are not fond of reading and writing because this type of student, they learn more in the types of pictures that they saw. Okay po, drawing also, and they could identify their learnings in illustration. Okay, so ganun po si visual learners. We have auditory learners. These are the type of students that they want to hear and listen to the types of learnings for them to be identified as successful in learning po. We also have kinesthetic. These are the type of learners that they want to engage themselves in physical activities. Okay? Alam ko marami sa atin ganyan lalo sa generation natin today. And number 4, we have the reading and writing learners. These are the type of learners that they want to read and write more, enable for them to identify or to show the learnings that they have. So, konti lang yan, no? Alam ko marami sa atin ang hindi fond ng reading and writing. So, and that is normal. Okay po? So, and about this, 4 types of learnings naman po, adaptable naman po siya lahat. So, ibig sabihin po, we could be visual if we're not, if we will put interest on that specific area. Okay? So, that is very easy. Easy if you input some effort. Okay po? So, ganun na po yung learning natin ngayon. That is a practical ways in life. Ibig sabihin, hindi siya academic na kailangan mong matutunan, kundi kailangan mo talaga i-engage yung sarili mo. Enable for you to see your capabilities, your strengths, and your weaknesses. Okay po? And last but not the least, we have Benjamin Franklin. So, sabi niya po dyan, tell me and I forget, teach me and I remember, involve me and I learn. Okay, so one thing that we should remind ourselves in with corresponds to learning is that through reading, 10%, there is only 10% of learning. So, for example, di ba, whenever I engage into reading, pinabasa ko kayo ng isang libro, tapos talagang wala pong analysis na nangyari, wala pong pag-intindi, pag-unawa dun sa text na binasa natin, that the 10% of the content is a thing that you will just remember. So, what are the 10% that we could identify? Title, nagustuhan mong character, yung humor na meron dun sa text. Okay? So, ganun lang po siya. So, is reading effective? Of course not. Okay po? Kaya nga sabi ko sa iba kong students na if you really want to learn on this online class and engage yourself in online activities, do not consider module as a way of learning because you could not learn from yourself. That is true. Okay po? But the importance about this is that we could be independent in making our own interests and learnings from ourselves. But again, that is in short, hayaan nyo kami na gawin namin yung trabaho namin, and that is to teach. Tama po? Sabi dyan, teach me and I remember. Okay, so when your teacher would teach you some ideas, okay, of course, we will remember those, but not all. Most especially when we are engaged, when we are involved into types of activities, into kind of different learnings kasi 'di ba ang katuturan, ang mga tinuturo sa school that is evolving po. Ibig sabihin, when time goes by, mas lalo po siya nag-i-improve, mas lalo pong lumalaki ang population, mas lalo pong nadi-discover yung ibang capability and learning process and other techniques and teaching. Kaya po si curriculum lagi po siyang or once in a while po siyang nagbabago. Okay? Kaya po marami din na input na lessons na bago. So, that is the weakness of teaching and learning process din po. Kapag po may na-input na bagong learning sa bata is nakakalimutan na po yung mga susunod pa or mga nakaraang tinuro. Okay? And last, involve me and I will learn. So, the most typical or the most effective way for a learner to be improved or to identify that he or she is learning or the teaching is successful is when that specific student involved him or herself or put in an engagement to do that typical activity. Okay? So kapag ang bata, pinag-aral mo po ng kung paano magpalipad ng kite, okay? Arte, no? Kite. Okay po, ng saranggola, madali lang po manood kung paano magpalipad. Tama po. Pero kapag tinuruan mo ang isang bata and then you let him or her try, that is the learning there. Okay? You could not identify that a person learned if he or she just say po Opo, ma'am, natuto po ako. Pero kapag tinanong naman natin is, hindi naman totoo. Okay? So, ma'am, kasalanan pa po ba natin kapag si student nagsabi na natuto pero hindi naman talaga? Of course not. Okay? So, wala pong masama or makikita natin ang interest ng isang bata. Makikita natin yung kagustuhan na ma-engage ng isang bata. The more na magtatanong siya, the more na magustuhan niya na magtanong ng magtanong. So that is a very important factor. Questioning is very important factor. Okay po? Okay. And alam niyo ba na mas malalaman natin na si bata is natututo kapag marami pa siyang follow-up questions. Okay? So makikita natin yan kapag tayo nag-practice teaching at tayo nasa field na. Okay? So that is a very important factor. Okay po, questioning is very important factor. Involving students are very important factor. Kaya po tayo may tinatawag na practice teaching for you guys to identify what or how to do classroom setups, how to do lesson planning, how to engage yourself in student-teacher relationship, how to build rapport in your students. So that's a very important way. Okay po, yun po ang mahirap sa pandemic ngayon, hindi po natin na-identify paano tayo matututo ng practical ways of teaching kung mag-online lang tayo ng mag-online. Okay? So just be patient. We will be, everything will finish and this too shall pass. Just pray and have faith that everything will be done in the future. Okay? So let's continue. So now, what is assessment? Okay? So sabi dyan in education, the term assessment refers to the wide variety of methods or tools that educators use to evaluate, measure, and document the academic readiness, learning progress, skills acquisition, or educational needs of students. Okay? So, ano pong ibig sabihin nun? Sabi dyan, in term assessment, let me use a pen. Sabi po, in education, the term assessment refers to the wide variety of methods, okay, or tools that educators use to evaluate, measure, and document. So when we say assessment, that is in a way of different methods or tools or different strategies that educators, when we say educators, the teachers, the instructors, okay, use to evaluate, measure, and document. When we say document, to record or to input the academic readiness, the progress of the students, and the skill acquisition and or educational needs of students. Okay po. So ano pong ibig sabihin yan? So while assessments are often equated po with traditional tests, especially the standardized testing na ginagawa natin ngayon, 'di ba? We do quiz, okay po? We do ayun po, yung pinaka-usual po na example ni standardized test ay yung quiz po. We identify the learning of the student through asking WH questions. Okay po? Enable for us to identify what they learn in the content of the lessons that you have engaged them. Okay. So, especially the standardized test, we use that almost every day in teaching. Okay? Kasi actually po kapag tayo po ay nasa field na po ng teaching natin, we do standardized test every day, every lesson, every after lesson, enabled for us guys to identify ano ba natutunan ng batang ito kapag nagtuturo ako. Okay po. Kaya po si attendance ay importante kasi po through the help of standardized test, through the help of quiz, we could identify na hindi lang po si bata physically present, kundi mentally present din po at natututo sa sinasabi natin. Okay? And this standardized test was been developed, okay, so by testing companies and administered to large populations of students. So educators po use a diverse array of assessment tools, as I've mentioned earlier, and methods to measure everything. Okay? So, paano po ba? Kailan po ba nagsisimula ang assessment? That starts in a 4-year-old students. Okay? The readiness of a 4-year-old students Let's say that is kindergarten students, na measure na po natin ang bata. Paano ba natin na-assess ang learning ng bata na 4-year-old, 'di ba? Nagagawa tayo ng we write letters, nagagayahin nila, and that is assessment already. Okay po? We teach them how to brush their teeth, to take a bath, to wash their hands. That is an assessment already. So assessment is very important to measure everything, the learning of the student. Okay? And the last is 12th grade students' comprehension of advanced physics. Okay? So just as academic lessons have different functions, assessments din po are typically designed to measure specific elements of learning. Okay. So, ibig sabihin, kung kami mga educator po, we have different ways on, or we have the academic lessons that we input on you guys have different functions. Same with assessment. These have different implications. These are typically designed to measure specific elements of learning. So, for example po, the level of knowledge of a students po already has about the concept or skills in teachers planning to teach. Ibig sabihin, yung sinabi po ni ma'am kanina na enable for us guys to really engage students or to equip the learning of the students, we should vary our teaching based po doon sa outcome ng learning nila doon sa nakaraang lesson. So, I love my elementary teacher, no, na hindi talaga siya umaalis sa lesson kapag may naiiwan sa amin. Even absence, no, pagpapasok sa babalik na naman kami sa dati naming lesson. And I hope that is a very effective way. Kasi sa isang school year naman, hindi naman talaga nun sakop yung lessons eh. I mean, hindi sakop ng buong school year yung lahat ng lesson. Meron pa din talagang mga oras na um, pwedeng hindi magturo, pwedeng hindi matuto. Tama? Kasi meron tayong mga hidden curriculum na tinatawag. May program, may earthquake drill, na hindi mo na magkaklase kasi daw may bisita, may mga meetings teachers, mga ganon. Kaya, I really love those type of teachers na they do review or they do personal contact with the students to know the assessment or to know the learning of that specific student. Okay? Or the ability to comprehend and analyze different types of text and readings. Okay, so in English, it is very important that we have to really analyze our strength and weakness. So why po? Kasi di ba, as future educators, English educators, we could not give our students what we do not have. And that is true. Masakit man yan, pero that is true. Kaya po, back when I was in college, I'm blessed that I learned with myself. Kasi po, hindi po nagtuturo yung mga prof namin that time. And nakakainis yun. Pero alam mo yun, um, natuto kang maging independent with yourself na I really have to learn with myself din talaga. Lalo't wala naman tayong binabayad sa mga teacher natin. But, the job of the teacher is to teach. That's why we have to really teach, most especially in the future, no? You really have to engage yourself in teaching, whether you like it or not, whether you're in the mood or not. Okay? So that is important. So assessment also are used to identify individual students' weakness and strengths. Okay? So that educators can provide specialized academic support. Okay po? So ibig sabihin, si assessment din po, they're used to really know the strength and the weakness of the student so that we could provide academic support and educational programming, adjustment, or social services. So in addition po, assessment are developed by a wide array of group of individuals, not just teachers, okay? We have the state administrators, the universities, private companies, we have the state departments of education and group that includes a combination of these individuals and institutions. Okay po. And lastly guys, when we say assessment, this is more of engagement to physical activities. This is engagement to more wide variety of measures rather than paper and pencil engagement. We understood that. So, ibig sabihin po, when we say assessment, that do not it includes paper and pencil assessment po. Pero it is more of engagement. Ganun lang naman yung gusto na kong maintindihan. Okay po. That is effective ha. Pero po meron po talaga tayong paper and pen assessment na tinatawag, and that is the traditional assessment po na aaralin natin mamaya. Okay? So, let us move on. So, what is the definition of assessment by purpose? So, when we say assessment, the purpose of the assessment should provide multiple measures and opportunities for students to create and demonstrate what they can do with the language, to provide a comprehensive picture to a student's language ability, not just language ability, okay po? When we say ability, that would engage the other areas or other areas of education's ability po. The teacher should strive to create a balance between formative assessments and summative assessment. Okay? So the teacher and the language learners or the learners itself needs to identifies the goal, okay, the objectives and expected results before the beginning to plan a lesson or activity. Okay. Kaya po tayo may tinatawag na, anong tawag dito? Yung pinaka-initial type of assessment na ginagawa natin when you, di ba may entrance exam po tayo na tinatawag? So that is a type of assessment that would identify or that would recognize what are your prior learnings, or is that prior learnings po, or yung meron po tayong kaalaman or yung ability po ba natin ay fit doon sa course na gusto natin. So that is a very important. So ibig sabihin lang po, hindi lang po sa teacher ang na-engage po sa assessment or may kinalaman sa paggawa ng assessment, kundi din po si learners, of course. Okay? Kaya po, every time na magpo-proceed po tayo sa lesson, di ba, kung mapapansin natin sa module, meron po tayong objectives na tinatawag, nasa unahan po yon. So, ang objectives po ay dapat nalalaman din ni students para po at the end of the lesson, makita natin or mag-goal natin na napala po natin yung objectives natin or hindi. So, you could recognize or you could identify that your teaching is effective once the goal and the objectives met your standards or your students. Okay, so let's continue. So, in other words, it is very essential to determine what the learner should know, to understand, and be able to do. So, according po to Terry Crooks, on his article about the classroom evaluation management, sabi po dito, guides students' judgment of what is important to learn. Okay? So, sabi niya po, one of the important factor of classroom evaluation is that we guide students' judgment of what is important to learn. 'Di ba? At the very first part of our um, um, introduction, or kapag po tayo ay papasok sa isang klase, the very first thing that we should do with our student is to hihingi po tayo sa kanila ng kanilang expectation sa klase, expectation sa subject, expectation sa teacher. That is to give them or to guide their judgment, to guide their their the things that they want to do, or to see what are the weakness of the students that we should be engaging them. Next, it should affect their motivation. So, ibig sabihin, para po makita natin na si assessment natin is balance, or si classroom evaluation po natin ay maayos, effective po, it should affect their motivation. So, ibig sabihin, if this type of student is not that engaging, we should help them be more engageful to that specific activity, and for him or her to engage him or herself din po sa hindi lang po sa learning, kundi po sa sa social engagement, lalo-lalo na sa mga classmate niya, para po ma-lift natin yung motivation ng student. Kasi po meron tayong mga uri ng student na sa simula pa lang makikita mo na hindi talaga sila alam mo yon, makatao. Okay? So, we should shift that kind of mindset and to help them improve in that specific area. Okay? And then according to Terry Crooks also, we should help them also in self-perception of competence. Okay po? That learning is not competing with the ability that you have, but rather learning should be improving. Ganun lang po ang goal kasi ng learning, tama po? So structures their approaches and the timing personally study and consolidates learnings and effects and development of enduring learning strategies and skills. So ibig sabihin po, we should vary our learning po, our teaching. We should engage the students in um, a goal of deadlines. That's why in school, per se, we have deadlines that the students should meet because in corresponds with this attendance or with the help of deadlines po pala, we could identify also the weakness and the strength of that student. Is this students is active learner po ba siya na madaling matuto or meron pong problema po sa learning style ng bata. So that is very important for us to know po. So once the learning goals and objectives are set, the teacher and the learners must determine po what type of evidence will show. So how well those goals have been set or met, okay? And the assessment should reflect students' progress and should move from simple to more complex tasks. Okay? So that is the importance of assessment, no? Kapag na-engage po natin si bata sa simple task, pwede na po tayong mag-jump doon sa more complex tasks enable for us to identify or to engage them more sa more complex na mga ideas. Okay po? So, ganun po yung assessment. Hindi po siya pwedeng stagnant lang. Kailangan po siya ay progressive. Kailangan po siya ay ma-identify natin na natututo si bata kapag po siya po ay nagde-develop or nade-develop po sa learning na ginagawa niya or sa assessment na binibigay natin. So, okay, so after the objectives and the type of evidence of the document success are determined rather, then the teacher and language learners or the learners can begin to develop activities that will guide and prepare the learners with the knowledge and skills to master those act or objectives. So, the purpose of assessment differs according to who is conducting or using the assessment. So, number one, school administrators use assessment as a benchmark for instructions, placement, or exemption in course level or certification. Okay, so ibig sabihin po ng benchmark, so that is the mode or the way of formula or testing guide. So, this is one of the function or the purpose of assessment. Kindly list this down. Number two, teachers use assessment as diagnostic tools. Okay? Yan po yung sinasabi ko kanina. Diagnostic exams. Diagnostic tools and feedback for guiding instructions, evidence of progress, and evaluation of teaching or curriculum. And number three, researchers use assessments to gather data on knowledge about language learning and language use and for evaluation or experimentation of programs. So we have three types of educators here or the administrators. We have the school administrators, okay? We also have the teachers and we also have the researchers, okay? So, tulad po ng sinabi ko kanina, hindi lang po lagi si teacher sa magkakandak ng assessment sa atin, kundi din po ang iba't ibang school administrators. Okay po. Diba, at the end of every semester or quarter, meron po tayong teacher's assessment na tinatawag na kung saan i-assess natin si teacher, kamusta yung kanyang i-evaluate natin siya in accordance to the performance of that specific teacher. So that is assessment also. Okay, and researchers, once you conduct your research, guys, there you will conduct different types of assessment for you guys to show or to see that your research is valid, your test questionnaires are valid, and your specific ideas or the goal of the research have met. Okay, so assessment is very important. So why is assessment important? So ulitin natin, sabi po ni Benjamin Franklin, tell me and I forget, teach me and I remember, involve me and I learn. So the importance of language, no. The importance of assessment po, okay? So one of the most um important thing or factor that we should know or we should identify why should we use assessment is that asking students to demonstrate their understanding of the subject matter is critical to the learning process. Okay, so it is essential to evaluate whether the educational goals and the standards of the lessons are being met. Okay, so that is very important. Wait lang po ah. Okay po. So let us continue. So um I repeat, no, when we identify the progress or the learnings of the students, we should not be conformed po doon sa mga sagot nila na, "Ma'am, wala po akong tanong." "Ma'am, yes, natuto po ako." Okay? So, we should conduct assessment po, enable for us to really identify the learning of the student. Okay po? Or siyempre sa atin, ano po yun, conforme na parang advantage po yun sa atin kasi syempre hindi na tayo magpapaliwanag pa, magagawa pa ng assessment kasi po natututo sila. Pero huwag po tayong maging kampante to that idea na they don't have questions. Kasi po, ulitin ko, we could identify that a student is learning if they have more questions, if they have um, alam mo yon, mas naku-curious sila po sa tinuturo natin. So, that's very important. Okay? So, another importance of assessment po. Okay, wala po siya sa slide ha. Makinig na lang po tayo. Assessment is an integral part of instructions. Ulitin ko, assessment is an integral part of instruction. When we say integral, that is a must. That is a very important factor in instruction. Okay po. So, why? Because it determines whether or not the goals of instructions or educations have been met. So, assessments po affects decisions about grades, the placement, advancement. We have the instructional needs and curriculum, and we do adjustment. Okay po, via or with the help of assessment, and in some cases, funding. Okay, most especially in research. So, assessment inspires us to ask these hard questions. Are we teaching what we think? Are we still effective? Okay? Are we teaching? Tama? Okay? Are students learning what they are supposed to be learning? Okay? So is these ways to teach the subject better, or there are some ways for us to be identified as a better teacher? Okay? So thereby promoting better learnings, okay? So should be engaging or should be helpful for us. Okay? And sunod po, today's students po need to know not only the basic reading and arithmetic skills, okay, but be able to think critically, okay, and we also have analyzation. We should enclose or involve them in analyzation and to make inferences. Intindihan natin? Kaya po mas maganda yung mga tanong sa exams na ilalagay mo si bata sa situation and then ano ang gagawin niya. Okay, so that will assess the students' learning because they analyze and they interpret, they do inferences on the ways of how would they respond to a specific idea or specific matter. So changes in the skills based, okay, so or changes po in um, teaching strategies will be a very important factors also that we have to recognize in assessment. And knowledge of our students' needs requires new learning goals. Okay po. So, ibig sabihin po nun, we know that skills are developmental. So, that's why assessment should be developmental also or changing. So, this new learning goal change the relationship between assessment and instruction. So teachers, yung mga gampanin natin, we have or we need to take an active role in making decisions about the purpose of assessment and the content that is being assessed. So ano pong ibig sabihin ni ma'am? Ang ibig sabihin lang po hindi lang po pagtuturo ang trabaho ni teacher, kundi po mag-assess or maging motherly equipped po sa ating mga students. Kasi po, we should realize also or we should analyze also ano na po yung ano nila, ano na po yung level or growth nila doon sa pagkatuto sa atin. Tama po? And we could be identified as an specific or no, as effective teacher if we see or we observe the students are learning. Tama po? And they are changing also in behavior. Tama. Okay? So that is a very important factor that we should know as a future educator. So let's move on. Mahaba-haba pa po ito ha. So what are the common assessments that we are conducting or that we might conduct? Lalo po kapag kayo ay nasa practice teaching nyo na. Okay, so we have formative assessment. So formative assessments are ongoing. This is a continuous snapshots of knowledge, skills used for multiple purposes in monitoring progress, providing students feedbacks, modifying curriculum, and adjusting plans for new classroom learning experiences. So si formative assessment po, the purpose of this is to gather information and focus on practice. Okay? Ulitin ko. The main purpose of formative assessment to the student is for the student to gather information and focus on practices. So the teacher po facilitates learning when the students reflect on the individual learning process. Para mas maintindihan natin, I have here's example of formative assessment. For example po, participating in a dialogue or spontaneous conversation. So that is a continuous learning. Tama po? Hindi lang po nakadepende si learners po doon sa narinig niya kay teacher, kundi po this specific student would engage him or herself in researching and in peer questioning or peer advancement of learning by asking questions to a peer, ibig sabihin classmate, for him or her to identify what he or she learned or what he or she could implement on that specific activity. So another example po of formative assessment, role playing. Tama? Kasi di ba kapag nagro-role playing naman tayo sa school, hindi po si teacher ang gagawa ng script, tayo na po. So that is a formative assessment. We continue the type of learning that we have gathered on that specific teaching that our teacher have taught us. Writing short descriptions. So writing this course descriptions. So for example, may mga question po tayo na how would you end the story? How would you end, or if you were the main character, what will be the ending of the story? Okay, so that is an example of formative assessment. And we have interpreting messages. Napapansin natin ano siya, engagement po yung formative assessment. Ibig sabihin, hindi lang po siya nakadepende po doon sa natutunan natin, kundi it is continuous. When we say continuous, you conduct or you involve yourself in more engaging activities like researching, enable for you to know more about specific lessons. We also have the summative assessment. And when we say summative assessment, a summative assessment is a check of what has been learned at a specific point of time, such as at the end of the lesson, unit, or course. It is based on cumulative learning experiences, tests, or for achievement and mastery of specific performances objectives. So, and when we say summative, wait lang po. Let us remember po, no, nakalimutan ko sabihin, let us remember po that formative assessment po are ongoing. It is frequent and usually brief and not very formal. Okay? Ulitin ko. Formative assessment, that is not a very formal assessment. That is a test or paper, pencil instructions. They are used to guide. Okay po? Si formative assessment po, they are used to guide and improve instructions and learnings and are usually not graded. For example po, yung sudden recitations, that is a formative assessment. Tama? The importance or the factor or the reason why we conduct sudden recitation is for us to really know if the students is really listening or comprehending with what we are saying. And then when we say summative assessment, okay, so in summative assessment naman po, ang role po ni teacher is to evaluate students' performance. Okay po. So the assessment is rigorous. When we say rigorous, it is focus or its focus is on the result of the product. It is depending po on the age and level. And also summative assessment may include performance tasks, oral interviews, written reports, and projects, and external examination. So ano po yung mga example ng summative assessment? We have, of course, the midterm and finals. And we also have benchmark test na tinatawag. Yun na nga po yun. Yung quarterly exams natin. It includes preliminary exams. Okay po. And of course, exams, performance task. Okay po. So, yung mga output na ginagawa natin at the end of the semesters, that is an example of summative assessment. And we also have the national language examination. Yung national language examination po, kasama po dyan yung licensure exams na ginagawa natin. That is sa summative assessment, ano yung natutunan natin sa lahat ng pagkakataong nag-aaral tayo. Tama po? And lastly, we have the advanced placement language exams, which is not applicable in our country. Okay? Sa ibang country po yun. Most especially in USA because their language is English. Okay po. So we have the major types of assessment. So number one, we have the traditional assessment. So what is traditional assessment naman po? When we say traditional assessment, ito po yung tinatawag na test or test paper. Okay po. So this is taken with paper and pencil that are usually true or false, matching type, or multiple choice. So these assessments are easy to grade, but only test isolated applications, facts, or memorized data at a lower thinking skills. So traditional assessment po provide little evidences of what the learners actually can do with the specific learning. So also po, si traditional assessment po, kung mabalikan natin yung definition niya, ang sabi po dyan, it just tests or the learning or the assessment is isolated po doon sa lower thinking skills. Kasi po, di ba, this or the type of assessment or the type of questions that we could ask in a test paper could be reviewed. Kung basahin mo siya, okay, tandaan mo, memorize mo, pwede mo na siyang isagot doon sa exam. So that's an example of traditional assessment. There's no engaging at all. Hindi po papasok sa essay kay traditional assessment po ha. No po. Okay, so that are the type or that is the first type of major assessment, the traditional assessment. I'm going to discuss this later on because we're going to differentiate traditional and authentic assessment. And we have and also po pala in traditional assessment, so in order for us to evaluate what a learner can do with the learning that he have been equipped, a student must be evaluated po in accordance po doon sa sinabi. Sabi kasi dito sa details of instructions and learnings that the teachers comply. So, ganun lang po siya. Hindi na po siya engagement. Okay? So, paano po pag gusto natin engaging po yung activity? Paano pag gusto natin ma-adapt po talaga maiuwi ni student talaga yung learning? So, we have to conduct performance assessment. That is performance assessment. And when we say performance assessment or authentic assessment, alternative assessments and integrated performances assessments. So this is learning through engaging na tinatawag po natin. So learners must more complex and use higher order thinking skills. So they must reason, they must solve a problem, or collaborate with others to produce individual responses. Ano pa? They must be graded according to rubrics, okay, and provided ahead of time so that the learners know expectations or used to evaluate students on multiple competency levels. So, pag tayo, future educators or educator na, nasa field na po tayo, kapag po tayo nagpapagawa ng activity ng performance assessment po sa bata, dapat po lagi tayo may rubrics, meron po tayong criteria. Tama po? Kasi po, si criteria or sa rubrics, dun po sila magde-depend on how will they perform well. Because it varies based on the rubrics or assessment that they are doing. Next class, we have the alternative assessment. So when we say alternative assessments naman po, let us take note of term portrayal or actual. Okay, so para mas maintindihan natin, when we say alternative assessment, it focus on the student's strengths. Kapag po si student ay magaling sa painting, therefore, we have to make them improve on that specific areas po para po mas matuto pa siya or mas ma-engage pa what they can do also, and allowing the teachers to choose an appropriate assessment for students with different learning styles, maturity levels, learning disabilities, physical disabilities, and other characteristics that could affect language performances or other performances of the students, diba? Kasi we have different subjects. While one students may choose to write a response, another students may perform better in a role play situation. Okay? So, although paper and pencil tests can be effective when assessing listening and reading comprehension skills po, they are not appropriate in assessment methods. Yun yung mapapansin natin, no? If you want to assess the learnings of the student, not just the learning or what they have or how would they cope on the future generation, si traditional assessment po ay hindi effective. Tama po? So we should use performance-based alternative assessment, authentic and performance-based of assessment po. Okay po. So through the help of this assessment po, they would be engaging themselves in performance skills such as speaking and speaking and more of visual activities. So that is a very important thing. And we also have authentic assessment. When we say authentic assessment, that is a combination of traditional academic content with the knowledge and skills needed to function appropriately in the real world. So the context, the purpose, and audience and focus should connect to real world situations and problems. And lastly, we have the performance-based assessment. Actually, class, si alternative assessment, si authentic, tsaka si performance-based, yan po yung ginagamit natin ngayon. Okay? Hindi lang siya masyadong obvious kasi nasa online teaching tayo. Okay po. So, si traditional assessment, ginagamit lang po natin siya kapag kapag summative assessment na po to evaluate the all learnings of the students. Pero kung mapapansin natin, sa summative assessments natin po, sinama pa din po natin si authentic assessment by making short answer questions, like for example, essays. Okay po. And the the type of assessment po, sa dulo po nung TOS kasi natin, meron po tayong tinatawag na making or engaging experimental po, ganon. So, that is one way or one help of our curriculum today. Hindi lang po ini-engage si students sa test or sa paper and pencil assessment, kundi nandun na po si Q&A or questions, answering questions specifically in the areas of judgment po. Okay? So, that is performance-based assessment naman po pala. When we say performance-based assessment, that requires the learners to perform in realistic situation. And here, class, the students participate in specific tasks, interviews, or performances that are appropriate to the audience or setting. For example, yung cooking show, 'di ba? So, dissecting frogs, 'di ba? Lalo na pag first year tayo sa biology ata yun. Okay, so the practice teaching, this is a performance-based assessment na tinatawag natin. We engage our students in a realistic situations, okay? Enable for them to perform or to see the learnings that they have gathered in college, in tawag dito, cooking procedures, 'di ba? Hindi natin ma-identify na marunong tayong magluto kung hindi natin siya ginagawa. Tama po? Kasi madaling matuto sa pagbabasa at sa pakikinig. Pero kapag yan ay ginawa na, dun talaga ma-identify yung learning. Okay po? And performance-based also should be vary or should be conducted in accordance to the type of learners that we are conducting. Okay? So that are the performance-based assessment. Okay po? So on my next video po, dun naman po natin mapapakinggan what are the difference between traditional and authentic assessments. And we have the authentic assessment in criticism, the frameworks of authentic assessment, and lastly, how to develop authentic assessments. Okay, so magpo-focus po tayo kay traditional assessment and authentic assessment para po mas malaman natin ano po ba yung mas effective na gamiting assessment in our generation today. Okay, so thank you for listening. Please proceed to the next video that I will be uploading. Thank you so much.